Dear attendees, all friends of our state, of the Ukrainian people, I am glad to see you all in Kyiv. Thank you all very much for your support. Special thanks, Alex, to you for these 2 days. Thank you so much for such strong support. I also want to thank General Kellogg in particular. Indeed, we did not know this before, but it turned out that the United States has air defense no worse than Patriot. Indeed, Mr. General, they talk about this every time you are here. When you are in Kyiv, Keith Kellogg, the people of Kyiv can definitely get a little sleep. I would like you to travel to all the cities of Ukraine. And we would really like a few more such American systems for our country. This is really not quite a joke. Honestly, when there is a representative of the President of the United States of America, President Trump, in Kyiv, there are no massive strikes. Killers refrain from killing. This does not work with representatives of other states. Perhaps it would work with a representative of China. But it seems that China is not interested in stopping, if not the entire war, then at least the strikes. This does not work with representatives of international organizations, including the largest ones. When the UN Secretary-General Guterres was in Kyiv, Putin was launching strikes. And he was even striking quite demonstratively. The Russians hit not only with drones, the Russians hit with missiles. It's the same when the OSCE is here. It's the same when NATO is here. It's the same when the mission of the International Monetary Fund is here or whatever. So, I think the United States has the power to influence Putin in such a way that he at least adjusts his behavior. And a very interesting question is how it works. I remember when the Chinese representative was traveling to Russia. They really handed us a note, sending all signals from Beijing, urging us not to use long-range weapons while the representative of China was in Russia. I wonder if this works the same way with the US and Russia, Mr. General. Perhaps this is an option on how to implement the ceasefire, which President Trump spoke about back in February. I am ready to give General Kellogg citizenship. Everything that's needed, an apartment, everything. If it will urge Russia to cease fire. Probably there is a possibility in China for the Russians to stop killing. But the world hasn't seen China's willingness to implement this with regard to Russia. China called for a ceasefire in this war, and not to expand this war, but Putin did nothing. This doesn't stop China from warmly welcoming Putin and talking to him about the most important thing, longevity. Perhaps Putin has some respect for India, as his words seem to suggest. But even India's calls for an end to the war, statements that our century is not a time for war, were also ignored by Russia. This applies to everyone else in the world. No matter which country it may be, the Russians do not stop killing in its presence or attention. But how long can America and President Trump's attention remain on this war, and the need to end it? How long will America maintain our defenses against Russian strikes? Will the world turn a blind eye to the fact that Putin wants to continue fighting? And he wants. I have no doubt that Putin was looking for an answer to these and other questions. And the fact that he chose to continue the war clearly says what his answer is. Putin does not believe. In Europe, in America, in the West in general. That is why Russia is at war. Putin believes in China, Iran, North Korea, and therefore he is looking for strategic agreements there. Putin is betting that money will erode everyone, by the way, both the weak and the strong. He believes that money will allow him to buy himself forgiveness for everything. In principle, this is his plan. To try to buy forgiveness. And continue the war. The main question is, who is the buyer? Dear friends, in fact, every day asks us all such questions. They are different. Sometimes unpleasant, uncomfortable, which, it seems, many in the world are not really going to answer. It is these questions about details, in my opinion, that make up the main question of today. How to end the war. 19 Russian drones against Poland from the territory of two states, Ukraine and Belarus, during Russian military exercises in Belarus. Targeted strike. NATO countries are raising combat aircraft. A few days have passed and it is gradually ceasing to be a topic. And what are the consequences for Russia? Let's be honest, none. The day before the attack on Poland, the Russians killed 25 people in the village of Yarova in the Donetsk region. Ordinary people, the elderly. They came to receive a pension. These are exactly the residents of Donbas that Russia says it is saving them. It kills them, and this is the very land that Russia wants to seize. Supposedly to save. To save from life. Exactly. Russia leaves nothing but graves and ruins in the Donbas. And of course, we strike back. The question is, what do others do? And just a little more than a week before Yarova, the Russian flag was flying at the Venice Film Festival. On August 28, the Russians struck a brutal blow on Kyiv. The children were killed. You remember, a total of more than 20 people were killed. And this is only here in Kyiv. But this did not prevent the Russian flag from getting to one of the world's leading art events. Because art seems to be outside politics, outside of war. Art is for the living at festivals. Not for the dead in Ukrainian cities, in Ukrainian villages after another Russian strike. How can we reward the Russians for the war by accepting them back into the world like nothing happened? Strong responses are needed. Strong responses. Putin's goal is the occupation of all of Ukraine. And no matter what he says to anyone, of course, he has spun his war machine so much that he simply cannot stop it. If you don't force him to change his goals, his personal goals, and change them fundamentally. Some may think that exchanging territories, or trying to seduce Putin with the resumption of trade with America or the world, seems to be able to stop this war. This is not true. The Russian war machine will stop only when it runs out. of fuel. And Putin will begin to stop it himself when he feels that the resources for the war will run out. And that is why it is so important that there are strong answers to every question, to every challenge. Russia must believe that the United States, Europe, and the West in general will not allow Russia to fight. Only by persuading Russia, only by dialogue, this cannot be achieved. There needs to be real, cohesive pressure. So that instead of the goal of occupying Ukraine, or any other country, Putin had a goal to preserve his economy, his system, to preserve his own, for which he has existed all these years. We can't replace the head, but we can change the main goal. We also offer partners a way to force Russia to stop strikes, to stop air terror. And if we, together with our partners, can truly protect our airspace reliably, first and foremost Ukraine, from strikes, as well as our neighbors like Poland, Romania, from any Russian threats in the sky, Putin will lose the meaning of his war. Russia will not achieve its goal only by assaults on land, and they have already lost the ability to operate at sea. It is the United States that has, and can provide, such air defense systems, such quality and most importantly, such a number of combat aircraft, so that within the framework of a multi-component air defense system, we, together with our partners in Europe, can stop Russia's terror. This will definitely force Russia to end the war. Moreover, Putin himself will tell you by his actions that it is worth doing. This is what a really strong conclusion should be after Russian drones on Poland. Russia is always trying to take advantage of some kind of deficit, in particular the security deficit, and it would be right to fill this deficit with really effective security cooperation between Americans and Europeans. It is for this purpose that we are creating a new system of security guarantees based on our strong army. Thank you, warriors. A strong Ukrainian army. Parts of the European security forces. When we talk about security guarantees for us in Ukraine, in fact, they are security guarantees for all Europe. This is already an obvious thing. Now it's even banal. But this must be repeated over and over again to give this system real substance. I am grateful to all partners who help us. We must find a way to influence China in such a way that they use their influence on Russia to end the war. Russia will not cease to be a supplier of raw materials to China and politically dependent on China anyway. This is the path they chose for themselves and walked too much along it. But we need to find an answer to how to motivate China to embark on the path without war. And this, too, largely depends on the strength of America and Europe, on the strength of the G7. And one of the key issues is the isolation of Russia. This is something that must be upheld necessarily. Sanctions work in particular for this. Tariffs should work in particular for this. Russian assets must be confiscated in particular for this. It is important that integrity works in political issues, in cultural issues, in sports, everywhere. Russia's bet on money, on Putin's belief that he will buy everything and everyone, should not work. Is it possible? Yes. If the world really wants the war to end, giving Putin any part of Ukraine's land. To stop the war. That will never happen. And this is not a decision. This is a pause. Like after 2008 in Georgia. Like after 2014, and Crimea and Donetsk. We need a guaranteed end to the war. We need guaranteed security for us. For Ukraine, for Ukrainian children. We need a guaranteed responsibility of Russia for what it has done against Ukraine, against Ukrainians, against our Ukrainian children. I thank everyone who helps us achieve this. Who supports our defense? Who works with us so that Ukraine and the whole of Europe are strong? Who helps us in our relations with President Trump and with the United States of America in general? Only together can we achieve peace. And only if we strongly answer all questions about this war. Strongly. In order for the goals to change. Thanks. Glory to Ukraine.